income. So you would report that because your income from your work, from employment, or from earning rents as a landlord. So the increase in value of your property, so you don't normally, if you don't sell your property, you don't actually have any income to pay a tax on. That's called the capital gains tax. So primary residences are exempt from capital gains tax, but actually all other properties, that's not your primary residence. If you were to sell the property, you would have to pay capital gains tax. So there's probably a couple of different things there.
Okay. Growth is a buzzword around the election, and Labour are certainly saying that they're hugely pro growth. And we must remember Liz Truss said the same thing. Tim in Birmingham's got a question. What's the difference between the Labour proposed economic policies dependent on high growth and Liz Truss's economic event that shocked markets and skyrocketed interest rates? Don't both depend on overly optimistic growth assumptions unsupported by the Bank of England and or the Office for Budget Responsibility? That's from Tim in Birmingham.
Another great question. So growth under the Liz Truss mini budget, because there wasn't that many in terms of impact, she was basing it on how much growth would increase as a result of her supply side reforms. And remember, she kind of rejected the Office of Budget Responsibility, who actually normally says, is this realistic, and can the government actually deliver this? So Labour, and I would also say the government's policies at this point, they are constraining themselves by fiscal rules. So in other words, they're not being told by the OBR reviewing their Labour is not in government. They don't have the OBR reviewing their growth figures. But I think their overall stance is they're taking the growth rate roughly at what the OBR has said, because they want to preserve the independence of this fiscal body. So that means that their policies, when they announce one, they usually try and explain how they're going to pay for it so that you don't increase the amount of debt the government takes on and relative to GDP, because their fiscal rule is you shouldn't increase debt to GDP over the longer term. It should be stable.
Okay, so that was a specific question about growth from Tim. I think this is a more general question about why politicians find it so attractive. This is from George. Let's have a listen.
Why we're wedded to growth, because I run a business. Say, for example, I've got £1 million turnover, and I say, right, I'm going to get a £2 million turnover next year. Without the actual cost being calculated, that extra £1 million might be costing me £1.2 million to generate that cost. That means I'm losing money generating that money. And it's like the economy. They keep on saying growth, but what they never take into account is what that growth costs. How do they calculate growth without showing us the downside? Because look, if I just give the up figure of my business and then don't show my costs, how can I judge if I'm making any money?
Yeah, it's a great analogy, actually. That's why the debt to GDP ratio is so important, because if the government is borrowing a lot of money to generate that growth, then your debt burden goes up. And you might say, well, hang on, you're only growing because the government is borrowing, say, 3% of GDP to generate 3% of growth. And so the debt to GDP ratio is the equivalent of a business saying, I've got a top line growth of 3%, but look, my cost is also